Today we are rewiring a 73 Dodge Challenger with this American Autowire wiring harness that is for 70 to 74 Cudas and Challengers. The reason we're replacing the wiring is like this connector here is broken into pieces. There's some melted terminals and some stuff that look weather damaged inside this fuse panel or bulkhead connector. I'll go ahead and unbox. And here's the instructions. Everything is bagged and labeled for depending on where the wiring harness already goes. Like example, front headlights, rear body, dash wiring, all that stuff is labeled in each bag individually with extra terminals in case you say you have to repin something else like VSS or something along those lines. New dimmer switch, battery cables, starting cables, those all come in the kit. This is what the fuse box looks like. No fuses are in it, but all of this wiring is all labeled for wherever it goes. So whether it's a wire for headlights, that's the wire that you need. This is an incredibly easy wiring harness to install. We removed all the wiring out of the car. You do have to modify where the fuse box and the bulkhead connector goes to the firewall. You just literally have to turn it, drill a couple holes, and it fits directly inside where the factory location is. Not a major modification. And this template actually is what helps you line it up. We also have a Holley EFI system on the car. We're using this blue wire for our fuel pump. It's already wired in with a relay. We're going to run it through this extra hole for other accessories in this bulkhead connector. And there's already a fuse and stuff like that inside the car that we can tap into to help protect it, even as a secondary going to the back of the car. We mounted this one into the car. I know it's a lot easier to do it with the dash out of the car, but my dash is not currently ready, so I just kind of bolted it in there to get everything fitting properly ahead of time. We have the bulkhead connector installed. I ran all my wires to all the sensors. I even ran all my headlight wiring, bolted it to the bulkhead connector. I wrapped everything in loom, and I bolted the relay and the fuse to that bolt in the master cylinder, ran everything across to the front. This is how I extend and do any kind of wire repairs that I do. I'm extending this wire. I twist the wire together, make sure I have my heat sleeve on beforehand. I go ahead and I use solder. I heat up the wire first, and then I use the heat from the pen to melt the solder right into the wire. After the wire is all soldered, I slide the heat sleeve up into it, use a little bit of a butane torch to make sure it seals. I use sleeves that have a marine type, so it has a sealant on the inside of it. When I routed all the wires to the front, I used these zip ties with tabs on them into the factory holes to hold the wiring in place. Here's another look at the wiring. It says headlight right on it. I know it's for the headlights. I ran all the wires and rolled them up in the front because I currently don't have the headlights for this customer car, so we'll just finish the headlights later. The wiper motor comes with a new connector. Since these are both male ends, the wiring instructions wants you to change to this connector here. Also comes with extra pins, so it's literally just plug and play. Here I already put the new pins on. I'll just slide it into the connector, and it looks just factory. I decided to use the factory starter relay. Instead of mounting it here on the factory looking location, I'm going to mount it back here on the firewall. That way it's a little bit more out of the way and shorter wires. I mounted the fuse to the battery right here on the core support. The charging wire goes from the starter to the alternator. It also is fused as well to protect it. Down here we have our reverse switch. This switch is bad unfortunately, so the reverse light stayed on, but it's just a 2-pin connector. While I wait on the dash, I decided to just go ahead and plug in all these fuses and relays. Here's the instructions, so that way you know where they go. And there you have it. The whole front of the car is wired. We're just waiting on the headlights and front end to be installed so we can finish all that stuff up. In the meantime, we'll probably move on to the trunk and in the inside of the car and get those all finished up as much as we can. We went with classic dash for the dash instrument cluster, so it actually gets its own separate wiring harness, and I can just put a pigtail connector on it and plug it right into the connector in the car. The gauges light up in this really pretty blue. All the gauges in this panel are from Autometer. And the dash is now installed. I can start wiring them directly to the connectors. As you can see, this is the factory harness that we just put in the car. Right here, we still have a few things to button up, like your under dash lights, some heater controls. All of these wires I will cut, and then I will put them to the extra male connector that came from Classic Dash, and it'll just plug directly into the white connector after I cut all of these, solder them, sleeve them, and this will plug directly into the dash. This will make removing the dash in the future a lot easier, just unplugging it like a normal connector. There are 3 extra openings in the bulkhead connector for your speed sensor if you have VSS. This car does. Under the dash, this is the turn signal and the ignition switch connectors. Obviously, the new one come with a different style versus these old round style. So now they're rectangular, like a GM's type connector. The kit comes with this new end to put back on, along with the correct pins, and these are the instructions for both of those connectors. And it's simple, you just cut off the ends, put the correct terminals on, follow the instructions. This one, I believe, was for the turn signals, horns, and things like that. Here are the pins installed, and we literally just plug it in, and these are just like a GM type connector. And then we can move on to the ignition stuff. Same thing, we can just clip off the connector and pin the correct wires. These 2 red wires are going to no longer be used according to American Auto Wire instructions. Later we'll do the under dash lights. There's already connectors for them, so we literally just have to plug them in and go. This is for the brake switch. There's also a clutch wire that's underneath here that I actually forgot to install. So I actually grounded it until we get all the correct stuff. And then we'll just move on to the rear lights. Here's the rear lights tail harness. This also has the fuel pump wires and the dome light. It already has a connector on it, so we just plug it into that one right underneath the dash. These extra harnesses are for fuel pump and for the dome lights. The wiring is loomed and wrapped to the back. I also have a Holley fuel pump in this car, so we use the Holley fuel pump and connector to make everything good. I ran it through the larger grommet, because before this was just a single wire. I ran all the tail lights, reverse lights, brake light wiring to the rear. You do have to install the connectors onto the wires here because some cars have more than just one type of socket to install in the rear. This wiring is for our door ajar switch. We don't have the switches yet currently, but this is where they're located. In the back, I routed everything to ground, I loomed everything, and tucked everything into their factory locations, or at least close to it. This here is for the license plate light. I ran everything nice and neat, tight, against the body panels. And here's again the license plate light. I had to put a connector on the end of that and drill a hole, and that is it. We'll finish the VSS wiring later on. We have to get the car back on a hoist, and everything's really, really, really clean looking. Really happy with the way this all turned out. You don't have to run loom over everything. I like to do it. I feel like it just makes everything a little bit more safe and cleaner looking. Back under the car, finally, we're doing the VSS. One is for power, one is a signal feed, and one wire is a signal ground. Usually the yellow wire is the signal ground. This is the clutch safety wire I mentioned earlier in the video. I forgot to ground it, so I just ran it to ground for now until we get these parts left over, and at that point it'll just be plug and play, and the engine cranks right over.